What if Vladimir Putin's latest naval threat isn't aimed at sinking warships, but at bankrupting the heart of the global shipping economy? Right now, a quiet crisis is brewing across the world's oceans that could hit Western trade where it hurts most. Welcome back to Taranov's Geopolitics, your premier destination for deep strategic breakdowns. In this video, we are unpacking Russia's dangerous new maritime doctrine. The real reason London's multi-billion-dollar insurance empire is suddenly on edge. And how everyday merchant vessels could get caught in the crosshairs far outside European waters. This quiet economic standoff will reshape global trade, so make sure you stay tuned right until the very end. Could Putin's threat of retaliation prompt shipowners to reconsider purchasing maritime insurance from London or the United Kingdom? The answer is potentially a yes. And this could transform Russia's shadow fleet confrontation into a much more significant issue for Britain's maritime industry. A new front in the confrontation between Moscow and the West has been opened by Russia's warning that Western seizures of Russian-linked merchant vessels could trigger retaliation. On August 12, President Vladimir Putin stated that Russia would respond if European nations seized Russian vessels. He also emphasized that any retaliation would not necessarily occur in the same waters where Russian ships were targeted. That last point is particularly important for the maritime insurance industry. At the end of the day, shipowners simply have to sit down and figure out whether their ship's Western paperwork, flag, cargo, or bank loans might accidentally paint a giant target on their back in the middle of nowhere. This raises an uncomfortable question for the maritime insurance market in London. Could being insured in Britain itself become a perceived geopolitical risk? There is no evidence yet of a mass flight from London insurers. But the mechanism by which such a shift could occur is clear. To understand why London could become part of this volatile risk calculation, we have to remember that London is the historic global hub for marine insurance. Ships, commodities, and operators traveling some of the world's riskiest waters are insured by underwriters headquartered right in the United Kingdom. That normally represents immense commercial strength. However, in the event of an escalating conflict with Russia, the same Western financial and insurance connections that render a ship commercially appealing could potentially render it more politically identifiable. A shipowner could therefore begin asking a brand new question when arranging cover. Does my insurance relationship expose me to additional geopolitical risk? The whole thing just boils down to what you're hauling, what flag is fluttering on your stern, and which sketchy port you pulled out of last Tuesday. It is evident that a vessel that operates exclusively in neutral waters would have a unique risk profile compared to one that often enters European ports or carries sanctioned commodities. But the possibility of Russian retaliation creates an additional layer of uncertainty. If you are finding this breakdown valuable, don't go anywhere. Because the strategic stakes are about to get even higher. Taranov's analysis is uncovering the exact economic pressure points that mainstream news outlets consistently overlook. When we look at how the shadow fleet is already changing the global insurance equation, Russia's dark fleet provides an important illustration. The shadow fleet is a network of aging vessels that are often uninsured by traditional Western providers and operate outside conventional Western maritime regulations. As described by the United Kingdom Parliament, these vessels are often obscurely owned. That distinction is absolutely crucial. The sanctions strategy of Britain is partially effective by targeting the infrastructure that enables international shipping, including insurance, finance, port access, and maritime services. If a tanker cannot obtain acceptable insurance, its ability to trade becomes much more difficult. But Russia's retaliation threat potentially reverses part of that pressure. Alternative insurance arrangements may be explored by legitimate shipowners who become concerned that Western insurance may position them as targets. That does not mean abandoning London overnight. Global maritime finance and insurance are profoundly ingrained in the British capital. Rather, the initial response would be far more subtle. Shipowners might just start haggling for higher caps, swallowing bigger deductibles, shuffling shell companies around, or quietly shopping for obscure non-Western underwriters just to dodge unwanted attention on tricky routes. This brings us to how insurance could become an active geopolitical battlefield. And the precedent set in other conflict zones illustrates the sheer speed with which maritime insurance can adapt to evolving military risks. War risk premiums for certain Saudi ports reportedly increased from approximately 0.25% to 1% in response to the resurgence of attacks in the Red Sea. While premiums for certain southern Red Sea voyages reached 1 to 2% of the total vessel's value. Similar repricing has occurred in the Black Sea as military attacks have increased. This does not imply that London's insurance market related to Russia is already experiencing an equivalent shock. It isn't. Stay with us. Because what happens next could trigger a domino effect across European supply chains that no one is talking about yet. Taranov's analysis is tracking the structural fallout before it hits the headlines. Currently, there is insufficient evidence to assert that Putin's August warning has resulted in a market-wide increase in British marine insurance premiums or a widespread exodus of shipowners from London insurers. However, insurance markets do not necessarily wait for a catastrophe before altering their calculations. They price probability. And Putin has just increased the perceived probability of a new category of maritime incident. This is especially critical because Britain has already demonstrated that it will enforce sanctions directly at sea. The risk became far more tangible after Britain's seizure of the Smirdos tanker in June. Royal Marines, the National Crime Agency, and Royal Navy aircraft and vessels were all involved in the operation. It marked a significant increase in Britain's readiness to physically enforce sanctions against Russia's shadow fleet. British officials subsequently acknowledged the possibility of Russian retaliation. The United Kingdom Chamber of Shipping stated that shipowners were aware of the increased risk and were assessing their exposure. Additionally, the Royal Navy has reportedly increased its surveillance of Russian vessels near British waters, with a 25% increase in monitoring activity year over year. Britain is therefore no longer merely imposing sanctions from behind a desk. It is increasingly enforcing them at sea. Russia's response could therefore target the exact same maritime ecosystem. Which leads us straight into the nightmare scenario for London. The most consequential development would not necessarily be a direct Russian attack on a British-flagged ship. It could be something much more subtle. Consider the scenario in which Russian forces seize a European-owned tanker that is insured through a London underwriter, but is located completely outside of the immediate European theater. Insurers may be compelled to reevaluate their pricing of Western maritime exposure, even if the vessel is not sunk or casualties are not sustained. Underwriters could begin asking, is this ship's Western insurance relationship itself part of its geopolitical profile? If that answer keeps coming back as a yes, well, the whole marketplace is gonna start cracking into pieces. Some shipowners might pay more for London coverage because it gives them access to Western ports, financiers, and counterparty. Others might accept less prestigious or less comprehensive insurance from alternative providers because they believe it reduces their geopolitical exposure. That would create a strange paradox. Britain's maritime insurance industry could become a victim of the very sanctions system it helps enforce. While the real danger is not fully playing out yet, the underlying calculation has fundamentally changed. At present, there is no indication that Putin's threat has resulted in a widespread abandonment of British insurers by shipowners. That would be an exaggeration. Keep watching. Because the ultimate strategic conclusion explains exactly how London could lose its historical dominance without firing a single shot. Taranov's analysis is connecting the dots between naval warfare and global capital. However, the strategic assessment has clearly evolved. Until recently, Western insurance was predominantly associated with regulatory legitimacy and commercial protection. In the current maritime environment, which is becoming much more confrontational, shipowners may also need to evaluate whether their insurer's regulatory jurisdiction, nationality, and affiliations with Western governments pose additional risks. That has the potential to be a massive development for London. The Royal Navy is not the sole source of Britain's maritime power. It is also supported by a vast commercial ecosystem that includes insurers, banks, brokers, shipowners, lawyers, financiers, and port operators. Moscow would not be required to destroy the entire ecosystem if it is able to convince Western shipping that British insurance carries a heavy geopolitical price tag. It would suffice to simply increase its cost. And this is the reason why Putin's shadow fleet threat could ultimately become an insurance story. This is not due to the fact that British insurers have already experienced a collapse, but rather because shipowners may soon need to consider whether being insured by London is becoming a primary factor in the global risk equation. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe and share.